Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Morning Glory video. Now before we get into today's video, I'd like to say a big thank you to Gamli for sending in some awesome pictures of his Imperial Guard army. I really like the classic Cadian colour scheme. It's a little bit of a lighter tone, which I like about that. Combine that with some classic red weapons, a good 40k staple, red bolters, red lasguns, can't go wrong with it. I just really like this combination. It's like a classic colour scheme with a new twist. It's just really cool. So thank you for sending these pictures in, Gamli. If anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, then please post them on my Facebook page, or you can email them to me at mordianglorytv@gmail.com. And don't worry if you're like me, an Ogren who's not had his bonehead surgery yet, you'll find all the links you need down in the description below. Without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. Now today, guys, I want to talk about 3 little tricks you can use to try and counter the incoming leagues of Votann. Now, as we all know, there's been a lot of chit and chat around the water cooler about how powerful the leagues of Votann are. In fact, they're so powerful that before they've even been officially released, some tournaments have actually banned them. So they're pretty good, but just like Sergeant Johnson always says, we've all run the simulations, they're tough, but they ain't invincible. And there are actually a couple of small weaknesses that the Votann have that if you can exploit them, you might actually have a fighting chance. At the very least, hopefully, you'll be able to go down swinging. So that's what we're going to talk about today. 3 tips and tricks and a couple of weaknesses that you can exploit of the leagues of Votann. Now, one thing I want to mention straight off the bat is, in case you don't know, maybe it's the first time you're tuning into a Morning Glory video, I am an Imperial Guard player, and so I often like to use the Imperial Guard, the Ashmatam, in my examples when we're talking about tactics and stuff like that. However, don't worry, this isn't an Imperial Guard specific tactics video. In fact, many of the things that I'm going to be talking about, you can easily translate into other armies. So don't worry if you're maybe an Orc player or a Space Marine player saying, how can these things benefit me? You will easily be able to translate the tactics that I'm talking about into any Warhammer 40k army. Now, the first thing that I want to do is cover a couple of small weaknesses that the leagues of Votann have. Just, lay the groundwork. What are the areas that we're going to try and exploit later on? Now, the first thing that I've noticed is they seem to have a distinct lack of indirect fire. That means that they don't have many ways of shooting out of line of sight. In fact, when I've gone through their codex, the only source that I can find, and please correct me down in the comment section below if I've missed something, is they have an indirect fire they can take on their big landcrawler vehicle. Apart from that, they don't seem to have any indirect fire, and that missile is a one-shot missile. It's one and done. Now, another weakness that the leagues of Votann appear to have is a lack of combat troops with the fly keyword. Now, they have some fantastic combat troops. Don't get me wrong, but they don't seem to have many that can jump over the enemy. So you do have things like the Berserkers, which are really strong. They can, if you see the math on those guys, they can take anything down in basically one round of combat. They make Repentia just look like a joke. And also, they're not even that fragile because they've got Feel No Pains and they've got Void Hardened Armor. And then also the fact you can just put them in the little transport buggy and shoot them forward means that they actually do have great maneuverability. But one of the weaknesses that they have is they don't have much in the way of fly. Yes, they do have those pioneers on the hoverbikes, which I imagine can fly around all over the place, and we've seen that they're a really strong early game air to now kind of unit, but the actual combat troops, the ones that are going to be taking down everything from demons to chaos knights to anything, the Berserkers, they don't have the fly keyword, which means they have to go through your lines, not over your lines. So those are the couple of key weaknesses that I've noticed. Now let's take a look at how we can exploit those weaknesses. Now, we all know that the leagues of Votann have got really strong direct firepower, but as we mentioned before, they don't have very good indirect firepower. So that is very simple for you to exploit. Take some indirect firepower of your own. Take some artillery. Now, for the guard, that's really easy. We've got mortars, we've got wyverns. Well, wyverns aren't that great, but you've got them. You've got basilisks, and you've got manticores. Now, the thing is that Votann do have essentially armor of contempt. They've got void hardened armor, but the guard doesn't really care about that because either you're going to be taking mortars, which have got no AP and just go spam out as many wounds as possible, and they're a flat damage 1, so you don't care about not being able to re-roll the damage roll with it. Or you're going to take Basilisks, which have got enough AP to crack through things like Armor of Contempt and Void Hardened Armor, and thanks to full payload, you can make them flat damage 3, which again nullifies part of the Void Hardened Armor. Oh, you can't roll damage against me? I don't care. I'm going to be flat damage 3. So I think that guard artillery is in a really strong place when it comes to going into Votann. You've got volume of fire from mortars, and you've got precision high damage from things like basilisks and manticores. Now, I know some people are going to be saying, but Mordian Glory, indirect fire got nerfed in the last balance data sheet. It's actually not very good anymore. Well, one thing I would say is, firstly, guard are an exception to those nerfs. They're literally written in that they don't suffer the hit penalties. They don't suffer the enemy getting better save penalties, so that's good. The other thing I'd mention is, if you're a faction which isn't guard and you're like, well, I have some indirect fire, I just don't know if it's any good, what I would say is just keep it in the back of your mind. If you're going to be playing into Votann a lot, maybe your indirect fire wasn't as good as it once was, but at least it's a tool you can have in your toolbox. But if you're going to say to me, look, it's just terrible, it's absolutely awful, our indirect fire for my particular faction just isn't an option, I'll hold my hands up. You probably know your faction better than I do. What I would say in that case is, most factions have access to something that I call pseudo indirect fire. Now, what the hell is pseudo-indirect fire? Well, basically, it's something that can kind of emulate the properties of having indirect fire without doing it, and the most common example of this is Deep Strike. Units that you can bring in from reserve anywhere on the board. Now, for guard, that's things like Scions. And really what you're going to be looking at here is you could be looking at close combat Deep Strike. That's fine, get up close and personal, avoid that, Votann firepower, get in amongst their lines. That is totally valid, but you could also do shooting Deep Strike as well. So, for example, Scions are a really good way of doing this. It's a small 5-man squad. It can come with 2 to 3 special weapons if you include the sergeant, and they just come down and they can deliver blistering firepower in a small package. And these kind of pseudo-indirect fire, these sacrifices that you can drop down, will allow you to get the jump on the Votann rather than them getting the jump on you. They will allow you to pick the battle. They will allow you to play to your strengths. Think about it. If you're deep striking down a little 5-man or a couple of 5-man squads with some shooting or some combat, they're going to drop down, they're going to smash the entire area, they're going to deliver their package, and then more than likely on the return fire from the Votann, they're going to die. But the Votann aren't going to be able to start stacking judgment tokens on these really big Death Star units that you've got in your army. Instead, their judgment tokens are almost going to be slapped down and then taken away straight away, because the units that they're plinking off are these dropping units, these essentially suicide plasma or suicide melter kind of units, okay? And so not only is that allowing you to dictate the flow of the battle, not only is that allowing you to get the drop on the Votann, you're picking the firefights, it also means that you're denying them one of their strongest army traits, which is their judgment tokens. Because their judgment tokens aren't able to be stacked up because they're only fighting essentially chaff, but it's not chaff that doesn't do anything, it's chaff that's dropping in and actually causing the headache and doing damage to them, then they're going to get very frustrated very quickly. They're not going to be ending up with those judgment tokens that they want to be stacking on those big Death Star units. So we've covered the first tip, which is indirect fire / pseudo-indirect fire. Now the second tip that I want to talk about is another way that you can exploit the Votann's lack of indirect fire. You see, by having very little indirect fire, it exposes the Votann to a key weakness, which is they have to actually be out in the open to shoot you. They can't hide back, they can't hide out of line of sight and do damage to you. They are primarily a shooting army. They have some fantastic combat, as we've discussed, but they're primarily a shooting army, which means unless they're going to try and jump from cover to cover and not use their main advantage, which is firepower, they're going to be out in the open. They're going to be marching down fire lanes trying to get angles on you. But just because they have to expose their units to get effective shooting doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. For example, many factions have access to abilities that are broadly known as jump, shoot, jump. This is where you can move out, shoot, and in the same phase or same turn, move back again. So you're able to actually get your firepower into the Votann and deny them any way of getting firepower into you. Now they do have some stratagems, which means that when you shoot them, they get a chance to shoot you back. I acknowledge that, but they can only do that on one unit. So if you're able to leverage both indirect fire and jump, shoot, jump, then you should be able to, in theory, deny them the majority of their return firepower. Now, some examples of jump, shoot, jump include Tal Battlesuits, basically all the varieties of Eldar can do fire and fade, and also the Guard via Talon tank commanders. Now, the Talon have a unique tank order called Like the Wind, and it allows them to move out, shoot, and move back again. And you've got to think, tank commanders are some of the most powerful units in the Guard army. They're an absolute crutch right now. And if you're able to keep those tank commanders alive and do damage to the enemy, That's pretty good. What you've got to remember as well is the Votann are a relatively short-ranged army. So you might be thinking, but I want my demolishers on my tank commanders. Yeah, that's fine, because the Votann more than likely are going to be within 24-inch range to take advantage of their weapons, or even 18-inch range if they're going to be using things like beam weapons. So you can move out, fire a demolisher cannon to them, and move back. Now, the great thing about this is, yes, we know Talon can't re-roll the random number of shots on that cannon. We know that, okay? Now, you've got some ways around that. You could take something like an Exterminator autocannon, put Weapon Expert on it to get around the fact it's only got AP -1. Or you can accept the fact that if you move out, have a whiffer turn and move back, it doesn't matter so much because you've got 5 turns out of this tank command if you can keep jumping him, right? Also, what you've got to remember is a lot of people are talking about big 20-man Hearthkin blobs. Well, if they want to take a 20-man Hearthkin blob, that means you're going to be able to take advantage of the blast keyword, which means you're going to be able to move out, blast 12 demolisher cannon shots into them and move back. Also, what you've got to remember is if you're fighting things like enemy vehicles, then you can move out, do Hail of Fire, which gives you max shots on the demolisher cannon into enemy vehicles, and then move back again. What I'm saying is, Guard have multiple ways of being able to mitigate the random number of shots that they get on those turret weapons, even if you're playing someone like Talon who doesn't have a regiment trait or Katachan or Cady and stuff like that. Okay, so just keep that in mind that Talon could very easily be the anti-Votann regiment trait for the Imperial Guard. Okay, so we've covered one of the weaknesses of the Votann and a couple of tips and tricks for how you can exploit it. Now let's look at that second weakness and another tip for how you can exploit it. That lack of combat troops with fly in the Votann. Now, what that means is if they're going to have their berserkers loaded up in their moon buggies, they're going to be driving forward at you, unloading and then charging you. Okay, we accept that those berserkers are going to be getting up close and personal with us. But what if the only thing that they've got as a viable target is a bunch of conscripts, a bunch of lesser demons, a bunch of things you don't care about? Well, what that means is that berserker unit's essentially been wasted, and it's sat there, dicks in the wind, and then you're able to just pick them up with your firepower. This is a really key tactic. I've talked about screening before. It's really important for any guard commander, but I think a lot of other factions are going to have to learn the importance of screening going forward, because Votann are going to be buggy rushing you, and if you let them get the charge on what they want to get the charge on, you're not going to have a good time. So having chaff and having screens is really important. Now, some people are going to say to me, but I genuinely don't have chaff. I don't have screens. I'm more of an elite army. Well, what I would say to you is, what about transports? Okay, again, the Votann don't have a lot of indirect fire, which means if you've got your units in, let's say, something as basic as a rhino, okay, something as simple as a chimera, okay, those berserkers can rush forward, they can jump out, they can charge you over the course of however many turns, and if you're just not exposing yourself to the Votann firepower, then those berserkers are going to have to chew their way through a, 70-point transport, and then your guys jump out and kill them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, ranks of conscripts or lesser demons or Gretchen or anything like that. If you can protect your guys inside some mechanized units, then that means that those berserkers are going to waste their time killing metal boxes. And that's, again, a win for you. If a 200-point berserker unit wants to come flying in and pick up a chimera, or even 2 chimeras or even 3 chimeras, I don't really care. And I'm going to jump out and I'm going to kill all those berserkers. For me, that's a win. That's a big win. But that's all we've got time for today. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think I've missed something? Do you think that there's another weakness that I've not talked about? Let me know down in that comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, please consider giving it a like. And if you want to see more stuff like this and more tips for how to defeat some of the top factions like Votann, please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the content. If you really enjoyed today's video and you want to go the extra mile when it comes to supporting the More Than Glory channel, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to the generous support of my channel members, of my patrons, that I'm actually able to do More Than Glory full time now, do more of these tactics videos and help us try and defeat those top meta armies. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to the latest channel members and Patreon support. So a huge thank you to James Burrell, Inquisitor Ra, Jimmy, Waiting for Something to Happen, and Alonius Pius for becoming channel members. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to say a huge thank you to Waiting for Something to Happen, Nick Hooper, Leo King R, Alex Hines, and Kadia4 for signing up on the Patreon. I really appreciate your Patreon support, guys. Thank you so much. Now, last but certainly not least, I want to take a moment to say a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to supporting my channel, and I am eternally grateful to them. So a massive thank you and a big 07 down in the comment section for Navy Veteran, Philip French, Ross Miller, Tequal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course August Varney. Thank you so much for your support, guys. You know how much it means to me, but I say it every time, just thank you. It's life-changing, honestly. I hope you have all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.